So this is what we call the new normal in book tours. I am Geoff Edgers. I am the Washington Post national arts reporter, and I'm coming to you from our outside bureau in Concord, Massachusetts. And we're so lucky today to have Marlo Thomas and Phil Donahue with us, who are going to talk about their new book, which I am pleased to say I have here.
Oh, look at that! Good.
I'm holding on to it. It's a lengthy and fascinating book. I actually just got it yesterday, and I'm about halfway through. And this book is called "What Makes a Marriage Last." The best way to describe it is Marlo and Phil go all over the country interviewing couples about their own marriages, and in the process end up revealing maybe more than they wanted to about their own marriage. Now, I feel like they don't need an introduction, but I'll give you a brief introduction. Marlo Thomas, who I first remember from the show That Girl, and then Free to Be You and Me, my favorite record as a child. And on stage and on screen, she has been everywhere. Phil Donahue, as you know, for 29 years, right? Had the talk show Donahue, a man who I think was also portrayed on Saturday Night Live by at least two amazing cast members. So that is an honor. And they're here and they're going to talk with us. I'm going to open up things by talking with them and asking them questions about the process. And then we're going to have a special treat for you. And then your questions are going to come through. As you can see, there's an area to ask a question. You can even vote on the questions. I may regard your vote. I may disregard it. I may just like your question, even if only one of you voted for it. But the thing I want to start out with is for both of you, you start out this book by telling us that one of your great rules was to never talk about your marriage. Am I correct about this?
Right.
Yes, that's correct.
So this is proof you have decided to talk about it. Explain to me what happened here.
Well, I think we went out on this.
We had a huge fight to start off, but somehow Marlo, dropped a little foo-foo desk, and I'm behaving now.
No, actually, we went out thinking we were going to be reporters. And once it got started, it was obvious that the way this was really going to work and feel good for everybody was for just to be a double date. And so we flew all over the country, as you said. We even went to Toronto for Elton John and David Furnish. So it became a double date. And then we didn't really have any set questions. We just started talking, and when you sit down to talk with another couple at dinner or something, one couple doesn't talk. So we shared feelings, and before you knew it, we were all talking about our feelings and about our marriage. And since the topic was marriage, it was 2 hours of talking about marriage. Right?
Yes. And I got to speak too, a little bit now and then.
What I love about the style of the book is that both of you, as we know, are master communicators. And rather than just plopping a tape recorder in front of Patti Smith and John McEnroe, you participate in the conversation and steer it at certain times and push it in certain ways. I'd be interested in hearing about a couple of experiences you had where you said, boy, I can't believe we got into that. I can't believe they told me about that, knowing that I'm writing a book on marriage.
Well, I think we're pretty surprised when Kelly Ripa and Mark Consuelos talked about the fact that they had a fight in their very early year of their first year of their marriage, and he threw her wedding ring out the window, and that was shocking. I was surprised that they told us that, and I think Jesse was surprising, right, Jackson?
Yes, he was. Jesse was on the Donahue show a lot. In the early go, in the middle of all the trouble.
And he never got into what he did in his marriage, though.
No, he didn't. She was something. Apparently, Jesse was a bad husband in California on one occasion.
Right.
And a child resulted. And his wife, I mean, we're sitting there and he's talking about this. And his wife said, well, when people ask us how many kids I have, or we have, I say, well, I have 5. Jesse has 6.
The Reverend.
The Reverend. They call him the Reverend.
And she said, I call him the Reverend to remind him of who he is and who he needs to be, which I just think, I mean, I loved her. She was very, very candid and very smart. What's interesting about the book, I think, is that there isn't any challenge one could have in a marriage that isn't talked about in this book. I mean, Kira Sedgwick and Kevin Bacon lost all their savings, 30 years of savings to Bernie Madoff, and Michael J. Fox and Tracy Pollan are experiencing an issue, a health issue that's going to last the rest of their lives. And Jesse and Jackie had the challenge of infidelity. And Jamie Lee Curtis talks about her cocaine addiction and alcoholism. It's all over the book that people talk about these things, and also couples therapy. A couple of couples went to therapy. Who were they again?
As you know, I'm a brilliant man. I just can't always remember where I parked my car. You're talking about who?
Brian Cranston.
Oh, yeah.
Brian Cranston. And
Ron Howard too, right? Are we also Ron Howard and his wife? Yeah.
And Ron and Cheryl Howard picked up some ways of dealing with their arguments, and so when they're having an argument, they tape it, and they each get 2 minutes only on the tape. And he said it's amazing how polite you get once you know the tape recorder's going, and then they listen back to it, and he said one of the times they did it, he thought to himself, she's taking up too much time, she's dominating the conversation, and then when they played it back, he realized it was 50-50. And that has really helped them. They learned that from a therapist. So,
but these people really, they cared very much. They wanted the marriage to last. I mean, obviously, that's page 1. The thing I noticed about the book right away, do you have a copy there? I want to show them the first photo inside the book, the first of a couple.
Yes.
No, inside.
Okay.
Inside.
Oh, you mean Jimmy Carter?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I'll get to that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful
right
picture
at the beginning,
of
right.
the Carters.
No, they're the first ones. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that a great picture? Oh my goodness! And they were in their 20s. I think she was 19 and he was 21.
Look at that.
Look at them. They were so cute, and they were dear to talk to. They've been married 74 years. I mean, here we are making a big fuss over 40 years, and they've been married 74 years. And they read the Bible to each other every night in Spanish. They learned how to speak Spanish, so they have a Spanish Bible. So even when they're traveling, they stay in the same text. But Phil is right. Every one of these couples really wanted the marriage to last. And I thought Kira Sedgwick said such a great thing. She said, you can't go into marriage with a plan B. You got to go in, all in, committed to it. And Peter Herman, who's married to Mariska Hargitay, also says something very smart, I thought. He said, if you get married thinking the other person is going to make you happy, it's not going to work. He said, you get together, you build a life, and in that you find happiness. And that's such a wonderful, mature way of looking at marriage. Because if you think the other person's going to be the one to make you happy,
who said getting a divorce is more complicated than
Elsa Walsh, who's married to Bob Woodward, she said, why do people put so much energy into the disruption of a marriage? Why don't they put all that energy back into making it work? Which is really true. And I think a lot of people talked about the fact that they knew so many others who run at the first.
Too early.
They're looking for the escape route the minute things get tough.
I want to ask you too about your own. Here's a picture, by the way. This isn't high college. Holding.
That's our wedding day.
That's wedding. Yeah.
Wedding day, 1980. I want to ask you a question now. I remember about your own perceptions or misconceptions, feelings toward marriage. Now, Marlo, you tell me if I'm right. I believe that you would not allow Donald to marry you in the finale of That Girl because you did not wanted to send the message that that's that's the dream, right? That's the ultimate goal of every woman. And Phil, you answer that. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ask Phil. Go ahead.
And Phil,
you said it. You're right.
You had been divorced, and it sounded like you weren't itching to get married again. Tell me about each of your feelings personally about marriage before you met each other.
You know, it's funny. I was a good Catholic, as my mother would say. There were two kinds of Catholics. Just a Catholic, and then there's a good Catholic. You know what? I was very naive. I thought you got married, you had kids, and lived happily ever after. So I was very, very naive and unprepared for the challenges that come with, living with me.
Well, also, they got married in their early 20s, 21 years old, fresh out of college, and had 5 children in the Catholic way in 6 years. I mean, that's a very big thing to put on a young couple. It really is.
Right. So who can blame her for leaving? Huh?
No, who can blame the fact that the marriage kind of imploded? Most people, they wait a couple of years and get to know each other, to have a family. That's
not then. Back then, it was was not as popular.
So it was really a crapshoot. But I could see that. I mean, I really didn't want any part of it. And by the time I was in my 30s, my girlfriends who'd gotten married in their 20s were already on their second marriage, and they had a kid from this one and a kid from that one. And I thought, what a mess! Really, this looks completely resistible to me. So I never was going to get married. And Phil, I don't think had much of an intention of marrying again, as I recall.
Right, and my sister, who loves me unconditionally, told me on the phone once that second marriages often don't work. And I thought, wow, I never thought of that. So, I got a sister who loves me.
well, half of us get divorced. Half of the people in this country get divorced. And people duck out early. They duck out after 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 2 years. They haven't really given it a chance. It always interests me when people get married, get divorced after just a few years. You think, well, you didn't really work on it, did you? You didn't really, because there's so much accommodation that takes place. And that's one of the things that we both found fascinating in the book, is that people had to not change their personality, but they had to accommodate the other person's personality. That's a big thing.
Marlo, I by asking the question of Phil before I let you answer, I let you dodge the question. But what would make you feel such a aversion toward marriage at that period of time, as I was saying, in the early 70s, that you didn't want to send the message to other women who are identifying with you that marriage is the answer? Was it in your own personal life, or your home life, or your growing up?
Well, it's two things. First of all, That Girl was about a young girl on an adventure and finding out who she was. And I didn't want the young girls and women who followed that girl to think that the only happy ending was a wedding. So that was that situation. For me, I had grown up with a mother who gave up her singing career to marry my dad, who traveled all over the country, is a nightclub comedian. And my mother had a lot of frustration about that. She was a good mom and she was a good wife, but she had some hurt about that. And so I saw that. And I felt kind of guilty about it. My mom really gave up most of her life to take care of her children. And I think we could have done it on half. It wasn't necessary. And so my generation sort of reacted to those mothers who gave so much of themselves and didn't get another bite of the apple that they wanted. So that was certainly one of the reasons. And my father was one of 9 Lebanese boys. So I saw a lot of these Mideastern marriages where the men were all dominating. And I thought, what do I need that for? I have my own name. I bought my own house. I have a career.
Your mother had a career.
Yes, she did.
Rosemary Mantell.
Right.
Sweet singer of sweet songs.
Right. She changed her name from Casaniti to Mantell. She somehow thought that was less Italian.
But then your father came into her life.
Right,
Then what happened?
right, yeah.
What happened to Rosemary
Yeah,
Mantell?
and then she went on the road with him. So the model wasn't good for me. And so that was fine. I was very happy not being married. I had nice boyfriends along the way. And then I met my Irishman and I changed my mind. And that to me is so fascinating that so many couples in the book like knew the day they met or they knew the next night.
A lot of first time.
Right.
It's amazing how that happens. Apparently more than, I don't know if there's any research on this, but a lot of people found the first, maybe Malcolm Gladwell is the Blink.
Yeah.
Makes the point that first impression is the most impressionable, the most lasting, and that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
I don't know what the numbers are about survival of the marriage.
Well, why don't you tell Geoff about when we met in your dressing room at the studio?
You mean the green room?
Yeah, the green room.
Well, I first of all. I don't know if you have to be Catholic to understand this, but she was definitely a bad thought. And
a bad thought. That's a compliment in a way.
Yeah. So, you could commit a bad thought just by going over to French kiss Marlo. Even before you got there, you committed 2 or 3 sins.
And then we went on the show, we went on the air, and then we just started flirting. It was really rather funny. I mean, it was embarrassing too, because I was on talking about feminism and all the things I really cared about, the ERA and things like that. And instead I was saying things like, "Oh, Phil, you're so funny. Oh, Phil, you're just hilarious." And I was like, who is this person that I had turned into? And I think that, a lot of chemical things are happening, and that's what happens for a lot of people. There's a sort of a chemical reaction, and then sometimes that builds into something else, and sometimes it burns out. And,
one thread in many of these interviews is you have people often who say, I am never getting married, whether it's they're saying I'm never getting married or I'm never getting married again. And like you're describing, they meet that person and suddenly they're, oh, sure, I'll do this. And it's just interesting to me to see how many second marriages you're working through or seeing. Is there anything we're always looking for answers here. Is there anything we can take away what you saw people figure out after their first marriages that allowed them to work through their second marriages and find them successful?
Well, Ted Danson, who's on his third marriage to Mary Steenburgen, who's on her second marriage, and they've been married 30 years, so it's going pretty well. But they talked a lot about owning up to what part of the thing that's not working was their responsibility. And they said that's what made the difference in this marriage, that they owned up to what they didn't do right in their other marriages. And they own up to each other when one of them is wrong. It's not just saying, I'm sorry. It's saying, I did this intentionally, or I did this because I was mad, and not you made me do it, not the blame game, but just saying, I did this because I was mad at something.
Yeah.
Just owning it. And I think that's something that we learned through years of marriage, that instead of saying to the other person, well, you always do that and it always makes me mad, or you never do that. We've actually said to each other, we cannot say always or never, because when you do that, it's as if everything you've ever done is rotten. So you have to start to be really specific about, what hurts and what bothers you. And we've gotten very good, I think, at sitting down.
Better. Yeah. A lot better.
Are there things, I'm sorry, Phil?
Well, as each year has gone by, for me, the marriage got easier. And, Marlo is she's not a,
I can't wait to hear this word.
well, you're not a
Piece of cake?
weeping willow in the
Oh.
corner.
Oh, no.
I
think Geoff could say that.
Yeah. No, I mean, Marlo tells you what she thinks. And so I come to every situation well schooled on how to behave and what to say.
Oh, listen to this.
Well,
how many years did it take you to stop yelling? Tell Geoff about that.
Yeah.
Go on, explain.
Well, I don't want to have a fight in front of the Washington Post.
But that's a good thing to get to, which is what you said one day. You said, "Why am I doing this?"
Yeah, I did say.
Well, talk about it, because that's something that he could take away.
Well,
come on, Irishman.
Well, this could be helpful for me, Phil. I've only been married for about 21 years. I could use this information.
All right. Well, you're certainly out of the woods, and I mean, you'd be a pretty odds-on favorite bet for a marriage that lasts.
All right. So he said one day, I don't know why I go off like this, and it doesn't make me happy, and it doesn't make you happy, and I'm going to try to control my temper.
Right. Thank you for remembering that.
All right. Well, I mean, I think it's important that people can make decisions about how to live. That's what's important about it.
Yeah.
It's to own up and say, why am I doing this? Like we used to have a tremendous fight when we traveled because I take too much luggage. I know I take too much luggage. It's my fault. It's my problem. But I just, it may rain and I'll need these shoes, and we'll be on cobblestone streets and I'll need these shoes. And what if we want to go hiking? I'll need these. So it's always been a bone of contention. And for years he would just nag me about it all the way on the way to the airport. Then we get to the baggage guy, and he'd say to the baggage guy, "Do you believe how many bags this is? And we're only going away for 5 days." Like the baggage guy cares. And so after finally one day, he stopped doing it.
Well,
and why? And you said,
well, I was tired of spending $45 before we even got on the plane, just to make sure all the people who helped schlep our bags were.
But why did you stop? What, one day you just said, that's it. I don't.
Yeah, I first of all, I knew that I was never going to win this argument. And, and my back hurt from carrying all these bags. And, it was another one of those unnecessary crosses.
Exactly.
That happened to.
That's the point. That's the point, that we don't have to continue these things. James Carville, who I just adore, said that when he and Mary get to a place where they go around and around an issue, he finally says, "Oh, let's just kick this can down the road." And he said, behind every successful marriage, there's a whole collection of cans. And Phil and I started to use that. When we're going around and around about something and we're not getting anywhere, one of us will say to the other one, "Oh, let's just kick this can down the road." And that gives you such a feeling of relief. We don't need to resolve every single thing. Judy Viors, who's a wonderful writer, I'm sure has many books at the Politics and Prose bookstore, but she said the same thing. She said, walk around it, step over it. It isn't necessary. People who sit up all night so that they can solve this thing, my friend Letty Pogrebin said, "I don't want to sit up all night until somebody admits something. I want to go to sleep, and in the morning it'll be gone." In fact,
I want to ask you to a question, because I'm very interested in this. And I'm not going to I'm sure this is what made your process so magical. Is when you're sitting and talking with another couple, they want to share naturally, and then you want to share, and we find out all these things. My wife and I, when we have an argument, she is totally fine not resolving it and just going to bed. And I hate that. I want a full discussion and for it to be worked out and peace to be made. And she's just so. How does that work in your household? Where do you fall on that?
Well,
I'm the one I hate it. I mean, I do.
I hate what?
I hate unresolved conflict. And we have certainly our fair share
Right.
of that.
Right.
I think you're better.
At what? I'm dying to hear.
And well, at not being so impetuous and anxious and nervous about finding an answer immediately.
Yeah. I don't think you have to pick at something. I mean, I don't know what it gets you. It just, let's talk about it tomorrow, or let's talk about it when we're more level-headed. And because, most arguments that you have, I'm sure, with your wife, and we have, and most long married couples have, they're over the same things. He didn't put something in the hamper. I didn't do something with the magazines that came. He lost the paper. I didn't find the key. I mean, and it's that stuff.
Yeah.
You're not.
And I'm a towel on the floor guy.
Yeah. So that's a big. So I'm constantly looking for the kind of hamper that will invite him. So those are the arguments you're having. So it isn't like you're going to break up over it. But if you keep picking at it, I mean, I just stopped picking at the fact that he doesn't always get everything into the hamper. And that's accommodation. I had to make that accommodation so that it doesn't bother me.
But now I do pick up the towel.
I know you do, because
I think Phil needs he needs a laundry chute. Have you considered that? I think he would find that more enjoyable. Just a big hole in the floor where he can drop it.
We don't have that in our building. We live in an apartment. We can't throw our laundry to.
We have a special treat. I just want to I want to tell people about, and I'm going to introduce them first by their picture. But we have a special treat here. 2 people coming to join us. We see this.
Isn't that's the most romantic picture? I just love that picture.
Let me see.
The wedding picture in the book.
Oh yeah, look at that.
And these 2, you know them as people usually asking questions. Judy Woodruff and Al Hunt, who are journalists and have been married just like you 2 have been for 40 years. And they are featured in the book. I could
Hi, I'm Marlo and
Judy.
Phil.
Who's that gray haired guy?
There he is.
I feel like this is my Passover Seder, the experience we had. But I want to welcome you all, and I'd like to just ask you, talk amongst yourselves for a little bit about the approach from Marlo and Phil, and then thinking about what you were going to talk to them about. And I don't know if you've seen the entry in this book about you, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this whole process.
Well, Al was much more prepared and thoughtful about this than I was. I have to say, I went into it kind of not knowing what we were getting ourselves into. Al was the one who spent time thinking about, well, this is that part of our marriage and another part of our marriage. But I have to say, just listening to the 2 of you right now with the towels on the floor, this is what we really identify with. This is where the marriage reaches its zenith.
Yeah.
I would just add, and I would love for Marlo and Phil to jump in. I think everyone worries a little bit about talking about your marriage. What are you going to say? How far do you go? How candid are you going to be? And we had, 1 or 2 unique problems that we had never discussed. And I thought it was worth doing. And I must say that they came over to our house one night, I think, Marlo, for about 3 hours, and it went so much better than anything we could have thought about. It was engaging. It was interesting. And, I think Phil or Marlo said earlier, it was a conversation. It was a chat as opposed to an interview.
Right.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a date. It was a double date.
We enjoyed it too. And I think Marlo's always used my early career as a journalist to make this point. I've always said when I was, 17, 18, I got my first job as a journalist. I didn't take any tests. I didn't have to pee in a bottle. I just said I was a journalist, and I was. And that's the way you want it. The more people you have gathering the news, the more likely it is that somewhere in this large crowd will be found the truth. And so there I was in Adrian, Michigan, crossroads of America, just north of Toledo, and I had a microphone that said WABJ on it, and I could stop the mayor cold in the hallway of City Hall. I couldn't get over how powerful I was. And
The book, and that's why the book.
well, this is how we wanted to focus the book. If we get a lot of people talking about their marriage, first of all, they'll lose their inhibition if they see that other people have done that as well, and they'll be more candid about what it is that bothered them, how they overcame that, what little advice they might have.
And that somewhere in the middle, like with journalism, will be found some wisdom. And that's what we feel that we found. We found by talking to all of these different couples that we did not have a how-to book. It's not a book of advice, really. It's a what book. What did this couple do when this happened? What happened and what did they do? And every situation is different. But as Phil said earlier, they all had this one thing in common. They wanted to make it work. There wasn't a plan B. They weren't looking for the escape route, and they went through the fire. You know, Michael J. Fox said that every time he just gets up against a wall and he can't get up over the wall and he needs somebody to help him up, it's always Tracy. Tracy's always the one that gets underneath him and pulls him up over the wall.
Judy and Al, I want to ask you about, and I'm sorry, every once in a while I realize I'm interrupting and I don't mean to. I see a delay.
No, not at all.
We'll all get used to this because this is the way we're going to speak together for the next 7 months, apparently. Judy and Al, I'd like to ask you about, one really moving part of this book. Obviously, you talk about your son and what he went through, what you've gone through. If you could tell people briefly about that, and also tell me about the idea of broaching that topic in a book like this and doing it with Marlo and Phil.
Well, you bring up something, Geoff, that yeah, it's a very painful part of our lives, but it's been with us for 21 years since our son, we have a son, Jeffrey, who was 16 years old. He was born with spina bifida, which is an issue with the spine. So he was 16 years old in 1998, and he had to go into the hospital for what was supposed to be a routine procedure to do something. And it turned out that he came out profoundly disabled. There was a mistake, and it changed our lives as a family. It changed his life. He's now significantly disabled. He lives in a supportive group home near Washington, where we live. But it was an event that turned our lives upside down. I think it was the closest thing to losing a child, because you've lost the person that child was. And what we talked to Phil and Marlo about was how we got through it as a couple and as a family, and the effect it had on our other two children. And you're right, we don't talk about it a lot, and we haven't tried to completely hide it, but it's painful, and it's shaped us as a family. It certainly has shaped our marriage. Reshaped our marriage. It's no doubt made it stronger, but it certainly put it to the test in all kinds of ways that you can imagine.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I was we had a couple people who had said, why don't you write a book about this? And we just said, oh my God, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to relive it. And so there was some reluctance. I think Judy worried about it a little bit more. But I think once we began talking with Phil and Marlo, and we thought about it beforehand, I think it was, I won't say a catharsis because it was 22 years after the fact, but that we were able to talk as openly about it. And I'm looking forward to all three of our children reading this.
What I appreciated about the way that you presented it is the cliche is, what we go through, the adversity we go through makes our marriage stronger, makes our family stronger. And you two, I think, are very clear that it's not quite that simple. And what you went through just, it strengthened you in many ways, but it changed your lives and changed your relationships. And that really comes through. Marlo and Phil, how did you know you were going to ask them about Jeffrey going into your interview? No. And then after you were done and they had talked with you so openly about it, did you go back to them and say, are you sure you want to have this in the book, or how do we do this in a way that you're comfortable with?
Yes, we did go back and ask them about that section. We wanted to be sure that their children, when their children read it, they would be comfortable with that section. But no, we did not intend to talk about that at all. It came out as we talked. Again, as I said, it's what happens and what you do about it. It just came out in talking about the ways in which they put their lives together. I mean, they're very famous journalists, and they had big, powerful jobs, and the balance between everything they wanted to give to their children, especially to Jeffrey, and really rethinking, should they stop working? How do we balance this? All of the, in a way, it's a template for all the things that happen to people when they try to figure out which member of the team does what. But they did it together as a team. And because they're great journalists, they researched the hell out of that disease. They talked to everybody. They did everything they could to be sure they were doing the right thing, and balanced their love, their marriage, their other children, this child, their careers. I mean, it's really.
And Judy mentioned the doctor who told her, I mean, imagine, I assume you were feeling, the parent feels responsible for this.
Right.
And the parent isn't responsible for spina bifida. But it is such a gut punch that a doctor said to you something like this. I wasn't there, but don't let this crush you now. If you do, we're going to have two people who are sick, not just one.
Right. And he said, this is a long illness, and for your sake and for your son's sake, keep doing your job. And it's so, that wonderful doctor was taking care of their son and taking care of them too.
Yeah.
And I just found it to be a triumph, but it wasn't anything that we set out to talk about. But there's so much more to their marriage than that, even though that's a huge part. But there's also, them as a couple, they as a meeting out during primary season, and Al being so smitten with Judy's legs and following her through the primary. I mean, there's a lot of, as Phil called me, a bad thought. I mean, Al was chasing Judy for all the good reasons, and they have a great romance, and that's what's exciting. That marriage has lust and love and a lot of stuff in it, and it has challenges, but all the juice that's in the orange gets squeezed and is a nutrition to marriage.
Jeffrey, Marlo is so kind. She's not pointing out. She's right. I was smitten. She's not pointing out that it was not reciprocated for quite a while, and it was only reciprocated
For a month.
We were longer than we went out for dinner, and I was with a dear friend, Edie Wilkie, who was married to Don Edwards, a congressman. And we ran into Judy, and Edie said, give her a call. And I hesitated. The next day I went to the office, and there was a message, Judy Woodruff called. I thought, oh, fabulous, what I've been waiting for. It was Edie who had left the message, and that's why I called Judy back, and that began it all.
Yeah. And am I right, though, did Edie left the message, though, right? Judy had not actually phoned you.
Right.
That's what I love.
Yeah.
Call him the day after I see him at the restaurant. No.
He needed a little shove. He was shy. I thought that was nice.
Yeah, my son Kevin wrote the note for me. I came home from work, and it was on the kitchen counter in his handwriting. Marlo Thomas called. And I thought, wow.
Well, that's because you had called me. I answered your call.
Oh, well, you didn't have to tell him that. It's more romantic.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to let you, Al and Judy, I'm going to let you go. I have one personal question I need help with from Al and Phil. Your hair, we're in this worldwide pandemic, and as you can tell, I'm having some issues. It's a full head of hair. Are you allowing, Marlo, I saw you cutting Phil's hair. Judy, are you taking care of Al's hair, or are you just letting it go here?
No, we have I will tell secretly, I'm able to get my hair, someone who does my hair come a couple of times a week, because I'm now broadcasting the NewsHour from my home, and we're trying to minimize any trips. in fact, right back over there in the library. And so when that person comes, who is amazing, he's agreed to cut Al's hair. So he's done it.
That's great.
Looks pretty good, doesn't it?
It does. Looks great. I cut Phil's hair with a manicure scissors. But Phil and Al have such great hair, you can't kill it. I mean, no matter what you do to it, it's going to look nice.
I had a barber say to me one time, "Wow, I wouldn't go in there without a gun."
About your hair.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey, I have gone, I assure you, at least 100 times I've been in airports and people would say, Donahue. And, you know, at first I would say, no, I'm Al Hunt. And they were so disappointed. I then said, yeah, I have a conversation with him. It was great, Phil. I don't know what it did for your reputation.
Hot in a crowd. That's why I love it.
All right, well, we're gonna let Al and Judy go now, and we're gonna ask people in the audience if you have any questions for Marlo and Phil. We're gonna use there's a little place you can actually punch them in, and I will read the questions to them, and they'll address them. So, Al and Judy, thank you so much for coming. It was such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah, can we say goodbye? Thank you.
Thank you.
Al and Judy.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be down.
All right, it's back to the three of us here. Let's see. So, questions. Okay, a question comes from Ryan Lee, asking if there's a couple, one or more, whom you wish you could have interviewed for the book, did not have the chance to do so.
Oh, we really wanted to interview the Obamas. And I called Mrs. Obama and a couple of times. She was lovely. And she said, we just can't. If we do your book, we're going to have to do every book of every person who's ever worked for us, and they're all writing a book. So we didn't get them. But I love their marriage. I think it's wonderful.
Phil, is there somebody?
Yeah. I kind of developed an admiration for Ed Wilson, who is I call him the Ant-Man. He's the Harvard professor who...
The Naturalist.
Yeah, his book is titled The Naturalist. He was very close to Jim Watson, who was the Nobel Prize winner.
But Ed Wilson's wife wasn't up to it.
Right.
She wasn't well.
Right.
But we know them quite well.
Yeah. 2 Pulitzer Prizes. How's that for a life?
So those are 2 of the people that we would have liked to have interviewed.
I'd also, you mentioned presidents. You have one in here. I'm thinking also about George Bush and Laura would have been interesting as well. I feel like that relationship is. Yeah.
Yeah, we did ask George and Laura. Laura was in another book of mine, and I don't think they wanted to talk about their marriage. You know, they have a terrific marriage. They're not hiding anything, but not everybody wants to talk about their marriage, including Mr. Donahue, because we started this book with him saying, we're not talking about our marriage, okay? And I said, okay. But of course, we ended up talking about it because, as we said earlier, you can't have a conversation where both couples aren't speaking. But with people that we spoke to said, I'm afraid to jinx our marriage. So I thought it was very brave of people to come forward and to trust us to protect them, and to not, we weren't looking for gotchas. We're not journalists. We're another married couple who wanted to share and hear what is it? What is the secret sauce that makes marriages work? And that's why talking to so many people, as Phil said, you get a lot of wisdom at you. And many people who've read the book have said that, they said, I have so many new things that I can do now, and many ways to approach, like not making your spouse stay up all night to figure out why you're angry, to go to sleep on it and see what happens the next day, to accommodate each other's differences, to not make everything, World War II. And also to tell each other. Bob Woodward and Elsa Walsh talk about the fact that they say, I love you to each other every morning and every night. And I said, well, do you do that because it was an argument or something? And they said, no, because that's our way of saying to each other, we're okay. Everything in our bunker is working well.
It's hard to have a real loud argument after you've said, I love you.
Yeah. But again,
helpful.
it's a touchstone for them. And we've started doing that as well. Little ways to start showing appreciation.
Do you find that people come to you as a couple that's been married for 40 years when they're having problems or need advice and ask you to, do you find yourself counseling them, trying to help them in some way and saying, I don't know how to do this? I'd imagine many people come to you with these questions.
Well, some of my women friends do. Men aren't like that.
Well, Philip was.
Yeah.
My namesake.
Yeah.
But
I had
true. I think women are more.
I had a friend whose husband had cheated on her, and she was brokenhearted, and she called me in the middle of the night, and I snuck downstairs in the kitchen and made some tea and listened to her while she spoke for like an hour. And I came back into bed, and Phil said, "Who was that?" And I said, "That was so and so. Her husband cheated on her." And he said, "You women kill me." He said, I don't know one guy that would call me in the middle of the night to talk to me about the fact that his wife cheated on him." And it's true. Most men don't have that comfort, don't have that kind of connection to each other. They're more, holding it off or don't want to admit things. Women admit it, and they want comfort. They want advice. And you can't give advice, but you can certainly give comfort.
Right. I lost, just so you know, I completely heard none of that because you froze on my screen, but I refreshed, but it was like magic that when it came back, you were just answering the question. So I have no idea what anybody saw from me other than panic, but I'm back. Let's go to another audience question here. Someone here says, it is from Laurie Seidman Oberman, is asking you, can you tell us about your first date?
Oh, yeah, you can tell.
Okay. Well, she was on the road promoting a movie, and she was in Denver. And she called me.
I called you back.
Right. And you said, is Denver close to Chicago?
Well, he said, I'd like to take you out to dinner. And I said, well, I'm in Denver, because I had gone to the next city already from Chicago. And I said, is Chicago close to Denver? Uh-huh. And he went, oh yeah, Chicago's very close to Denver. So he flew to Denver, and we had dinner at that hotel.
The hotel's name is
Brown Palace,
right? The
Brown Palace Hotel, and it was an interesting date. And of course, we walked in the rain, and when he got back to Chicago for his show the next morning, he had lost his voice. It was one of the only shows ever that he couldn't record. So his executive producer was really wondering, where this relationship was going to go.
Right, and it was a very well produced by the women in my office, a very well produced office. It was the producers had filled the entire audience with parents who had lost children.
No, not that wasn't good. You did that show. This was a show you didn't do. This was a show that you did not record because you.
I know. I was about to tell them that.
Oh.
I mean, but anyway, we did it, but we couldn't air it because my voice was gone. Well, I thought that was an interesting story.
It's a charming story.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I felt terrible.
But he continued to come and see me.
I've got another question here. I'm going to adapt this question a little bit. Brittany Kerfoot, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She brought this up. This pandemic has obviously been a challenge for everyone. And what's the biggest external hardship you've lived through as a couple?
Well, I'll start.
You mean the pandemic? Because of the pandemic?
Well, no, this person is, I don't know if they're talking about during the pandemic. I'm going to adapt that because I'm interested in the fact that we now, for better or worse, if we're married and we live at home and we're doing the right thing, we're spending a lot of time together. We're not spending a lot of time out of the house. And tell me how what has that been like for you two?
Go ahead, honey.
Well, I couldn't tell the difference between the washer and the dryer. I was, they're stacked and they look alike. I mean, it's, round window. So, I mean, I solved that thanks to her.
I didn't know we stood up on the hamper with a flashlight because we couldn't read it. Neither of us had our glasses. We couldn't read it. We finally figured it out. And then you figured out the big thing about the dryer.
Oh yeah. The bounce goes in the dryer. That's, that's may seem like a small thing to you, but it was.
I think
made me a PhD of laundry.
What's been interesting for me really is to have 3 meals a day together. We never do that except if we're on vacation. So usually whoever gets up and has their breakfast. And then for lunch, I usually put something in a bag and get in the back of an Uber and rush to a meeting. And then we meet for dinner. But to wake up every day and make breakfast together, he's terrific at making eggs. He makes all kinds of good eggs. Put them in a tortilla with bacon and figure out all other ways.
Bacon,
with the crispy bacon. And then we make lunch. And then we've been making a lot of spaghetti and stuff because my mom's Italian and I know how to make good Italian food. But we've been really, that to me has been the good part. The other part is just not, getting out enough. We have a trainer and we've been working on FaceTime with him a couple of times a week. So we've been able to keep our exercise routine up. And we take some walks in the park, but we live on the park so we can look outside and see if there's a lot of people or not. And if there aren't, then we put our masks and gloves on and we walk around and get some air. But we've been pretty strict about it. We wash everything with Clorox that comes in, all the boxes. Phil said the other day, what did you say? Smell like Clorox?
Oh, yeah, it does.
What?
Yeah, and I have to read the morning paper in the living room. I can't bring the paper into the kitchen.
Yeah.
So
near the food.
Yeah.
I spray it first. But he was chopping onions the other day and he said, this onion smells like Clorox. So I overdo it a little bit, but I've been really, we're what they call elderly and vulnerable. So we don't want to get this thing.
Do you find yourself, it's obviously, all joking aside, it's a terrible moment in time and it's very hard to figure out and cope with. Do you talk to each other and figure out ways to help with, we don't know how stress comes through and we don't know what can make us anxious. Have you been able to find ways with each other to relieve some of that and kind of work, talk through these issues?
Marlo Thomas is a neatnik. I mean, everything has to be in its place or she's not happy. And a lot of times when she's straightening like the kitchen out, she's shooting daggers at me. Why didn't you do this? So that's just another. Yeah, because it's not a mountain, but it's a.
And also to be able to say to each other, you know what? I feel kind of crabby today. I haven't been out. I'm this thing isn't working out. I can't do this way over Zoom. I really need to be in the room with this writer or something. So we're able to say to each other, I'm feeling a little crabby or feeling a little grouchy. So if I said something short a few minutes ago, ignore it. So I think we've never really done that before. That's something new that we've learned because we're in such close proximity that the little thing that's bothering you can leak over into your spouse's space because we're together so much and so close. And I think that's a good thing that we've learned, to be able to say, you know what, ignore me right now. I'm feeling kind of testy,
right,
and get out of the way. I think that's sort of what Ted Danson was saying. Own up to it. Own up to what you're feeling and what you're doing. That has nothing to do with the other person. And I think that's something that we've learned in this period. For sure.
So there's another question on here that comes from Kathy Blake, and she is asking, do you find that among the couples you've interviewed that the families they came from were intact, which is an interesting thing because we do talk a lot conversationally, but not scientifically, about children of divorce and children of who come from difficult family situations. Did you find any correlation between the marriages that are working out and people are working through them and what their families were like growing up?
So they were very diverse. Some people came from broken homes. Allie Wentworth and George Stephanopoulos. Allie's parents broke up, I think, when she was 2 years old. A lot of different kinds, and they have a great marriage. She's a real celebrator, Allie. She said when George's contract is renewed, she and her girls make a cake and put M&Ms on it and celebrate Daddy's contract, which is really, the idea of celebrating life. We do that too. We have our little code.
And a lot of the couples, or not a lot, some of the couples we interviewed took their kids to work. And it usually meant a movie set.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they were well behaved because I don't think they got any complaints about that. But I admired that.
Very much. Billy Crystal specifically, he and his wife took their children with them and kept the family together. But I think celebrating moments like what Allie said about celebrating George's contract, and also noticing, and this is something that we've had our whole marriage, when a lovely thing is happening, tell Geoff what our code is.
PHM.
PHM means?
Perfectly happy moment.
And it's true, when something is really lovely, like it's a lovely sunset, or we're having a nice meal, or we're just taking a walk or something, and one of us will say, this is a PHM, isn't it? It's a perfectly happy moment. And I think appreciating those perfectly happy moments really adds to the strength of your bond. You're letting each other know that you make each other happy.
We were on a paddle wheel boat on the
Mississippi Queen.
On the Mississippi River. Was the river?
Yeah.
And they had a Dixieland band in the
dining room.
The ballroom. I mean, it was a dancing floor. And I just happened to notice the clarinet player. Boy, he was, I just never saw anybody enjoy his work as much as this guy. I mean, he was really letting it go.
And Phil nudged me and he said, look at the clarinet player. And I looked at the clarinet player and I said, yeah, I've been looking at him. He is in complete bliss. And so from then on,
whenever we see someone totally into their work or whatever it might, hobby, whatever it might be, I'll say to her, there's a clarinet player.
Yeah.
So it's one of the memories we have.
You have these things that are in the little cupboard of your memories. That's what marriage is made of, is those little cupboard of memories. And it makes your history present in a way. That happened, I don't know, before we were married, that we weren't even married on that trip, but we remember that clarinet player. So it's, and I think it's making note of things, taking it as making it as worthwhile as we do our work. People always say, oh, I did a great job at work, or I got a raise, I got a promotion, I did this, I did that, I had a great television rating, whatever it is. And we congratulate ourselves on that. But I don't know that we spend as much time as saying, wow, wasn't this a lovely moment? And I think that celebration of moments and of your life together, moment by moment, is very much the fiber of what makes a marriage work.
Well, look, what a wonderful note to end on. I really appreciate it. I have a copy of the book right here, as you can see. But if you want to purchase one on your own, folks, there's a big rectangular box there. You just click on that, and the fine folks at Politics and Prose will get that to you. But what a pleasure to learn about this book and talk with you today. And I look forward to finishing it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Marlo, Phil. This was so much fun. I'm Heidi Lewis from Politics and Prose bookstore in Washington, D.C., and we are so happy that you could join us today. This was just
Thank
So
you, Heidi. Thanks for having us, and thanks for having Al and Judy. They're such a great couple, and it's
Right.
fun to be with them.
And I watch Politics and Prose almost every week.
He does.
So
that's
it's a big kick for me to be on it.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks.
we've got a lot of virtual events happening, and I want to thank our audience here for joining us. If you enjoyed this event, there are many others. You can follow our Politics and Prose event page, and you can also rewatch this video after the broadcast is over. You can rewatch the link by clicking on it again, and you will all have your books soon. And we are just so grateful to everyone for supporting our bookstore and for tuning in today. So grateful to Marlo and Phil for doing this, and Geoff, thank you as well. This was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Geoff.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Heidi. Bye-bye.
Bye.